20 years after the end of the Cold War, what are the challenges posed by a multilateral world? In the interview, World Bank President Robert Zoellick.
Mr. Zoellick, when the Berlin Wall was torn down and Germany reunified, you were working closely with then Secretary of State, Mr. Baker. How did you feel when all this happened?
Well, we had a sense of great opportunity. This was a moment that I think all of us had hoped and wished for, and our predecessors had wished for, but we also knew it was going to be a huge challenge. Fortunately, we had started to anticipate some of the work and had developed some relationships, particularly with Chancellor Kohl and Foreign Minister Genscher in the course of earlier of '89, that ended up being extremely valuable in getting the unification accomplished.
The four allies who had been responsible for Germany during the Cold War, the United States, Soviet Union, France, and Great Britain, had very different interests. Nevertheless, the 2+4 negotiations were a success, a diplomatic masterpiece. How was this possible?
I think, again, credit first goes to the people of East Germany. They created the momentum on the ground. And that was very important because obviously the Soviet Union and many of the other countries didn't want to take these steps. But we could take the developments that showed that Germany was in the process of unifying de facto, if not de jure. And therefore we needed to create the legal structures to deal with the assurances that all the countries of Europe would be interested in and to restore Germany to its full sovereignty. So the story was in part trying to make sure that one didn't delink the events on the ground from the diplomacy. So that's where the U.S.-German relationship, having a common front and emphasizing we would deal with Soviet concerns, we deal with the concerns of others in Europe, but being very strong about trying to end the four-power rights and restore Germany to full sovereignty was a critical aspect of the diplomacy.
The international system today is quite different, almost the opposite from the time of the 2+4 talks. Nothing remains of the Cold War blocs, and you have declared on several occasions that we are now living in a multilateral world. Mr. President, what does this mean for the way we interact, make business, and address development challenges?
History still leaves its aftermath. And so before one declares these issues totally over, you have to keep in mind, North Korea is a remnant of the Cold War system. Not too long ago, I visited Moldova, Bulgaria, Latvia. These are countries that still are working their way through the challenges of the past and still have anxieties about their security position. So, while we ended one series of trials, geography hasn't changed, and there's still issues of security for these countries in the future. But I think the biggest change over the past 20 years that we see in the economic area, and over time you'll see it in security as well, is the rise of the emerging economies, some of the larger developing economies, the China, the Indias, the Brazils, the Indonesias. And in this financial crisis we've dealt with, it's been striking that they were not the cause of this time as they'd been in the past, and indeed had been part of the source of growth. So I think part of the challenge is to modernize the structures of multilateralism, not to abandon it, but how do we take structures like the one that I now lead, the World Bank, and modernize them for a different era, recognizing you have different shifts in power and strength in the world economy.
As president of the World Bank, you are heading an organization that aims at eradicating poverty and improving the lives of millions of people. What are the key developmental challenges we need to tackle today?
Over the past 20 years, the developing world has obviously changed enormously. So different countries face different challenges. For example, for the very poorest countries, you still have needs of basic education, water, sanitation, what the UN has identified as Millennium Development Goals. When food prices go up, some of these are most vulnerable. But if you talk to many of the African leaders, they are also interested in accomplishing some of the things that Europe set out to accomplish 40 or 50 or 60 years ago. For example, they want infrastructure, they want energy, they want regional integration linked to global markets, they want a healthy private sector. So we don't only want to treat them as dependencies, we also want to create the basis for future growth. So I think one of the things we've learned in the developmental field is no one size fits all. And indeed, we're now at a stage where we can learn a lot from developing countries with other developing countries based on the experience. So what we try to do at the World Bank is not only provide financing, but try to provide knowledge and learning and experience from both developed and developing countries, with the idea that a rising tide will help all these countries, but you still have to deal with particular problems based on local circumstances.
You have strongly advocated and succeeded for developing countries having a greater say in the World Bank. The bank recently increased the voting share of some developing and middle-income countries. How will this change the bank?
Well, it reflects the changes in the world economy, and it's a double-edged process. In other words, on the one hand, you want some of the emerging economies to have a greater say, reflecting their economic size. You also want them to assume additional responsibilities, whether it be for open trade, whether it be with climate change, or whether it be helping other poor countries. Now, they may do that in ways different than some of the developed countries, so we need flexibilities of how they might support programs such as we have for IDA, which are grants or no-interest loans for the 79 poorest countries. They can also share some of their experience and lessons. So part of the challenge is to take an institution like the World Bank, created in 1944-45 at the end of one era, the era that led to Germany's unification, and modernize the structure, recognizing you have a different world economy, but we all have to share common responsibilities. And so part of this is, again, the notion that the old concept of the third world is passé. The second world was the Soviet Union, the communist bloc, that's gone. And to treat all developing countries as one group is unrealistic. So what we need to do is to continue to identify their challenges, but also draw them into the system as stakeholders to assume responsibilities.
What kind of World Bank do you envision 10 years from now?
Well, I hope that we'll continue on the path that we've been on over the past few years, where within the system of the G20 or the changing international environment, that it'll be seen as an important partner for all its 187 shareholders. So that includes developed countries as well as developing countries. And let me give you an example. I mentioned a lot of the growth is now coming from the developing countries, but about 30 to 50% of their investment money ends up coming back to developed countries such as Germany, which is a major exporter for machinery and other types of goods. There are win-win possibilities here. If you're going to ever deal with an issue like climate change, you're going to have to deal with the developing world as well as the developed world, but they're going to have particular sensitivities because they feel that they may not have caused the problem, or they may have sort of lower production of greenhouse gases. So what the World Bank and other multilateral institutions can do is try to identify the issues, bring parties together, and try to come up with practical solutions, combining some information and knowledge and analysis, but also a financing ability. And I think that over time, our challenge will be to further get the balance right, so some of the emerging markets such as China and India and Brazil, while recognizing they still have many developmental problems, can also play a larger role in decision making, but also in contributions, whether it be of financial or trade or other types. So the world is in a constant process of evolution and change. We want to keep these multilateral institutions healthy, vital, and practical and pragmatic, and so we have to anticipate the change and try to adjust to it.
Mr. Zoellick, thank you very much.